Welcome to class MB 533. This is an exciting presentation because it serves as a summary. It comes at the end of the course because I think it is the best place for you to understand what it means. We have been reading books and a few articles that use statistics, and we have been reading lots of qualitative research and opinions on how people express themselves and convey the meaning of their cultural mores and ideas. Now we're going to talk about the ethnographic tree and statistical curve. The ethnographic tree has to do with qualitative research, meaning interviews, ethnography, and the statistical curve has to do with research that involves surveys that are translated into numbers. For example, would you agree that the best political candidate should be a male, B, a female, C, have nothing to do with gender, D, it has everything to do with gender? Please select the best answer for you. And the results will be translated into each of those letters becoming a number. And the value of the answer will have become a number. And the numbers can be translated into a statistical analysis by looking at the mean, the average. Okay, enough of our introduction. May the Lord help us. Scientific research, which is the whole point of this class, helping students that communicate with God on a daily basis to think about scientific research. Scientific research is the process of inquiry, the process of asking questions and going about experimenting in order to respond to the questions. And in the process, developing a theoretical framework. For example, people in the mall have needs. Let's find out what the needs are in order for the church that is located at the mall reach out to them and serve them. And in the process, facilitate the communication of the gospel. So you go about doing scientific research. You have a question. That's your question. The very notion that you have questions and that you can answer them is the point of scientific inquiry. And we began this course by talking about Luke and how he had a question. Who was this man Jesus? What does the record say he did and he was? And with his bias towards understanding who this man named Jesus was, Luke, the physician, did his study. The second sentence here in this definition, if the product of the creative process cannot be independently reproduced, then it is an art and not a scientific research product. So, what's the difference between a sermon that has been preached under the guidance of the Holy Spirit and a research to help the church understand its community? Well, the difference is that the guidance of the Holy Spirit is a one-on-one experience between the preacher and God and the Bible. And obviously somebody can read the text, but even if they were to read the text, it would not be the same because it is an experience that is unique, idiosyncratic, happens only once. Even the same preacher will not be able, I have preached many sermons, some of them many times, and not one time is the same as the other one because it's an art form. The scientific research, if you lay out the rules of how you did it, it should be replicable. It should be possible for others to do it. Even if a slightly different results are found, the notion will be that if the same elements remain constant, meaning the population, the question, the experience of answering the question, the answers will be similar or the same. So the difference between art and science is science has a question that you do experimentation with rules that can be reproduced. Art is an idiosyncratic, it only happens once, rendition of an experience with God or with the aesthetics, with the beauty of painting, sculpture. That only happens once. And even if it was to be reproduced exactly the same, it will never be the same. They are all unique. So the types of research. It all starts with a question, a research question, and its sister, the thesis statement. The difference between a question and a thesis statement is the form that you stated. Obviously, a question starts with the question mark in your mind versus the thesis that is a declaration. One is the question, as its name says, and the other one is a statement, the thesis statement, as its name says also. And the same topic can be expressed in both ways. For example, people who attend malls have needs, M-A-L-L-S, malls. People who attend malls have needs that I can discover. That would be a thesis statement. The question will be, do people who attend malls have needs that can be discovered? You see? One is a thesis statement, the other one is a question, a research question. Academic inquiry must produce single pieces of knowledge and insights into truth. That's another element that it distinguishes art versus science. In art, you put a whole package in a context, not thinking of one element only. If you're building, if you're sculpting a statue of a bust, a head from the neck up, you're presenting your subject matter, the bust, B-U-S-T, with all of its elements, the rendition of what you conceive. But in scientific research, you will only be thinking, for example, the strength of the hammer with the chisel, how much rock it chips away, depending on the strength applied. That would be a research question. The academic knowledge must be reproducible. Others ought to find the same results with similar procedures. I said that already. Academic research must be obviously ethical. And that is a very important point. We protect the subjects by not submitting them to unnecessary risk. In the research that have to do with church building, church growth, and church planting, the risks are as high as eternity, but very low in regards to everyday living. It does not threaten, it is supposed not to threaten everyday living, cause harm in everyday living. Now there are types of academic research. One of them is the bibliographical one, which is the one that most of you have done all the time, which has to do with reading books and articles and even listening to lectures. Bibliographical means that you are passively gathering data from the source. All research we do in academia includes, as an integral part, a careful literature review. So all of what is done in science includes bibliography. A literature review is not a report on what has been learned about a subject, summarizing all previous knowledge. When you write your paper, please do not summarize all of the readings. That's not a literature review. Going back to the example of the mall and the church located at the mall, which by the way is a research project of one of the students, Makati to be precise, for the winter of 2015 course. So the question of, do people in malls have needs that they can be discovered and the church can use them to bring them to the gospel and share the gospel? If you are to do a literature review on this, obviously there's not going to be many articles or books written about how to answer this question. So you will be looking for books that have aspects of the question addressed. For this class, I'm not really asking you to look for more books than the ones that you have read for class, with the exception of one or two, or perhaps an article or two, if you so feel compelled and need it. But when you do literature reviews elsewhere, you will be looking for literature that has to do with your research question, but usually it's not a one-on-one. There are very few articles or books on the question that you have in mind, so you have to look for the foundations. A report pretends to cover everything that you learn. That's not good for academic work. That's a very low quality, just reporting. You need to do analysis. You need to address a particular issue that you are after. And you're going to say how the literature that you're reading informs. It doesn't have to agree and it doesn't have to disagree, but it will inform you. You're going to put a dialogue in motion. That's analysis. The analysis is dialogue of the sources, your opinion that are in your head, the questions that you brought, with what is being said and what is being said by various authors. Usually they contradict each other. You're going to document that insofar as it has to do with the topic at hand. In this case, discovering the needs of people who attend malls. Why do people spend 45 minutes seated on a mall bench? What can the church located at the mall learn about this to help them come to church, to facilitate the preaching of the gospel? So it is narrow because you're focusing it. A literature review is an analysis of what has been learned about your research question and thesis. A literature review builds arguments and leads a research question up to what the literature has presented and makes clear what is the next step or how the research question fits the current literature. So we could learn reading about mall churches, churches in malls, located in malls. We may learn about marketing and the surroundings of the mall by observing what people are doing seated for 45 minutes. You see that they are looking at the windows of and doing window shopping. So what is that experience about? So you will Google in your database, you will find in the EBSCO and ATLA the databases that are most common, and also it will include psychology reviews and anthropological reviews and journals. If you use EBSCO, EBSCOS, no finales, EBSCO, EBSCO. Now, doing that literature review, you find the articles, you read them, and then you analyze, putting it all together in one single reasoning, linear reasoning, one thought after the other. And that the conclusion of your literature review is how much the subject of learning what attracts people to mall, and how can you use that attraction to bring them to the church. All of what has been said, indirectly and directly, will be analyzed. Sorry. Excuse me. I presume this makes the lecture even more real. It's not a production of Hollywood, but a professor in front of a camera. Qualitative versus quantitative, the two kinds of research. And quantitative research, there's no such thing as qualitative data. Everything is either 1 or 0, says Fred Kerlinger. That's a very strong statement. And that's what defines quantitative research. You have to be able to translate all you do into numbers, and these numbers will produce means, average. The aim is to classify features, count them, and construct statistical models in an attempt to explain what is observed. Researchers know clearly in advance what he/she is looking for. Otherwise, you cannot do the survey, because the survey is a final piece. You cannot edit the questions from one survey person to the next, because then you will not be able to analyze it. You have to ask the same question. So you have to know in advance what you are aiming to know, which is a contradiction of terms, because if you don't know what brings people to the mall, when you build up the questions, you're building up out of ignorance. I'm telling you my bias in favor of qualitative research. All research ultimately has a qualitative grounding. Donald Campbell. The aim is a complete, detailed description. Researchers may only know roughly in advance what he/she is looking for. So you're going to ask open-ended questions versus giving options on a survey, predetermined survey. Is clear the distinction in your mind? Predetermined surveys assume fixed knowledge, asking people to decide between the options that you thought through beforehand. Qualitative research assumes little previous knowledge because it asks open-ended questions. The qualitative research recommended during earlier phases of research project, and for example, when very few writings are found in regards to what brings people to malls and what can we learn from going to a mall to bring people to the church that is located in the mall. There's very little knowledge about that. So you want to do open-ended questions. The design emerges as the study unfolds. Researcher is the data gathering instrument. You as the pastor, walking the mall and asking questions to people and doing interviews, you are the instrument. In quantitative research, recommended during later phases of the research project, when you have built already your theory, then all aspects of the study are carefully designed before data is collected. Researchers use tools such as questionnaires or equipment to collect numerical data. Yeah, you could also collect the amount of time people use per window shopping store. Is there a gender gap? Whatever. So it doesn't have to be questions, it can be observations, but you have to be translated to numbers. In qualitative research, data is in the form of words, pictures, or objects, versus, of course, in quantitative, it is numbers and statistics. It's numerical. In qualitative, is so-called subjective. Individuals' interpretations of events is important. For example, uses participant observation, in-depth interviews, versus in quantitative is objective, seeks precise measurement. So if you have fixed questions, then it doesn't change from one person to the next. That's why it is objective. Versus subjective, that the answers change from one subject to the next. Even if you ask the same question, if it's an open-ended question, the answers are definitely going to change from subject to subject, and thus make it qualitative. Sorry, I'm fighting. Pollen is what I'm fighting. In quantitative research, it's more efficient. You have fixed questions, but it's more limiting because you in advance determine the questions that you're going to ask. So you're not going to explore much new ground. Qualitative research tends to become subjectively immersed in the subject matter. But of course, versus quantitative research, researchers tend to remain objectively separated from the subject matter. In both cases, subjectivity happens because in the case of quantitative, subjectivity is covered with the assumed objective. The fact that you have an objective and the fact that you're doing a priori before doing the surveys, then it is not objective, it's subjective. You decided on the questions beforehand. Ultimately, we all live life subjective values. Impossible to do otherwise. There's no virtue in pretending objectivity. The virtue is in documenting your subjectivity. I repeat, there's no virtue in pretending to be objective. The virtue is in documenting the subjectivity that you bring. Why are you doing this research on the mall church? Well, because I have a church in the mall, I am a pastor, and I want the church to grow. Quantitative research is based on mean. This is the bell curve for the mean. And it is distributed in quarters. The 2.15 are the outliers on the one side, the negative numbers, and the 2.15 are the outliers on the positive side, the positive numbers. This is the number of people that will be located on any particular answer. So, for example, if you say the reasons for observing windows in window shopping is because A, I love to see the faces and the bodies. B, I am interested in looking at prices. C, I am discovering which is the most aesthetically pleasing.
It's 3:30.
Let's assume those are the three possible answers, and whichever the distribution is, the majority of people, 34% and 34%, meaning 68%, will be located in the center. But of course, there's three questions. There's no real center. What that means is when you add how many people answer A, how many people answer B, how many people answer C, you come up with a mean, but it doesn't exist. It could be that 5 people say A and 100 people say C and one person said B. And you add them together and come up with a mean that has nothing to do with those three groups of people. It is the aggregate. Numbers are the basis of statistical analysis. Numbers are taken as representatives of the information. How numbers relate to other numbers is the subject matter of the analysis. For example, what is the relationship between looking for what is beautiful with the relationship of looking what is the cheapest? And then, are these two associated with each other? Bibliographical versus ethnographic. Starts with clear hypothesis. Read books and articles selecting what goes along with hypothesis. This is bibliographical. And concludes with the quote, quote, right answer. One answer. versus ethnographic starts with clear area of knowledge, conducts open-ended interviews using indirect questions based on projective techniques. So you know what open-ended questions are. What do you mean by, can you tell me a story to illustrate? Or can you tell me what brought you to the mall? Open-ended questions. And there are clarification questions that are even more open. Based on projective techniques, meaning because people want to protect themselves, if you ask direct questions, they are likely to give you what they think you want to hear, to protect their image of themselves before you. They want to be right, they don't want to be stupid or wrong, or feel stupid or wrong, or even contradict you. It reports what seems to be the answer. It's tentative. Does that mean it's less valuable? It depends the question you're asking. If the study is about the relationship between length of time in front of a store window, and you want to know, is the length of time guided by the gender and figure of the mannequins? Is it tied to the prices of the products that are conceived or understood as good deals? Or is it tied to a combination of colors? Then, when you put together your questions in the process of doing ethnographic interviews, you are projecting, you are concluding what seems to be the answer. You can never say A is related to B in a linear fashion. By the way, you cannot say that either in quantitative research with a statistical analysis. It is always relationships what are reported, not causes. The distinction between a cause and a relationship is key. It's a key concept you need to understand. Any article that pretends to tell you people don't go to church because, and they proceed to give you the one answer, that is not good research. It is always to be reported what you learn, not to report a cause, i.e., meaning we know that people don't go to church because of how the pastors dress. Ludicrous. The topic will be ludicrous, and the idea that you will know that as a fact is ludicrous also. But there's a lot of bad research out there that is pretending to give causes instead of associations. If it's a statistical, it will always be associations. If it's ethnographic, it will always be associations, never causes in either one. The number distribution are presented as a curve. In general, it is assumed there's a normal distribution curve for all numbers. So, and this is what the normal distribution curve comes. 68% in the middle and 27.2 in the next intermediate circle, and 2.5 plus 2.5, 15, 4.30 in the extremes. Mean is the tendency towards the center. Variables, the various discrete elements of the research question and thesis. Correlation, the association between means. P-value determines if the association between means, i.e. correlation, is statistically significant, or how likely it is by chance. Generally between 5 and 10 is the p-value. In other words, between 95 and 90% of the data is assumed to be idiosyncratic, meaning original, and not because of preconceived ideas. And only 5 or 10% of the data is assumed to be by chance and not related to anything that is out there. The mean is always the sum of all measurements divided by the number of observations in the dataset. But there's also a median, the middle value that separates the higher half from the lower half of the dataset. And there's also the mode, the most common frequent value in the dataset. These are more complicated ideas than you need to learn, but I want you to have the notion that the information is out there and where to find it. We are not using any of this in the writing of the paper, but I need you to be aware. In a social sciences class, you need to have heard the words mean, median, and mode, because plenty of literature is based on the relationships of means. The mean number for this variable in the questionnaire, the question that was asked becomes a variable. The mean number for this other variable, the question that was asked in the parable, and how they relate to each other. Relationship, associations. The time people spend in front of the window in the mall, the reason why they are in front of that window. And there are relationships that are positive and negative. The more time they spend for the cheaper things, or the cheaper the things, the less time they spend. And median and mode are other expressions of the mean, emphasizing two different aspects of it. The median emphasizes the middle value associated with the tendency of the center. So for example, there are 5 10s, 3 1s, 11 6s. If you count all of these numbers, and this, let's say 100 numbers distributed, when you count them, putting them in order of value, whichever number is in the center is the median. The mean could be 5 and the median could be 7. The mode is the most common number. The most common number could be 3. So these 3 measurements are not the same, but they are all tendencies towards the center. The center, the mean, being described differently in each case. And this is so the mean, mode, and median are important because the distributions are differently. You see here between variable y and variable x, the relationship produces a line, but this line that is translated into a number, when you plot the P-L-O-T, when you plot the observations, they have this little curve. And these different shapes of the distribution indicate different mode, median, and means. The mean is 65,000, the median, which is the most common earning, is 50,000, and the mode, which is the most common of the salaries. So the median is the one located in the center. If you distribute people earning from $0 to $100,000, if you count how many people, when you get to half, that is the median. And the mode is the most frequent earning. Both qualitative and quantitative start with a question. Determine items for surveys. In quantitative, you determine the limits or boundaries of your qualitative research by the questions and indirect questions that you are going to ask. It sets biases and limitations at the beginning in quantitative because you have to write everything up. So your bias is fixed and is one for all. But in qualitative, you avoid biases during collection of data via interview, the indirect process. But there's going to be bias in the analysis always. It is concluded quantitative based on biases previously established, meaning I choose these 10 questions and that's a bias. I could have chosen 1 million other different questions, but I choose these 10 because of a reason. That's my bias. And in the qualitative research, it deals with biases at the concluding stage, when you're interpreting what has happened and what it means. The logic we use to make sense of who we are and what we do or do not do. A worldview is most evident at life extremes. And Dia de los Muertos in Guadalajara, you see the flowers there. There's a proverbial story that is not true and is a stereotype. But the Catholic woman is bringing flowers to the cemetery, to the specific plot, the grave where her husband is, while she sees the Chinese woman bringing beside her a plate of food to the grave. And the American woman laughs and murmurs something to herself. The Asian woman, Buddhist, does not laugh, does not react other than asking a question. The American woman says, when will the disease of your grave come out to eat the food you're bringing? And the Asian woman says, oh, that's easy. At the same time that your deceased relatives comes to smell the flowers. It's so difficult to see our own biases. The bias of the flowers are meaningful because, so what is the because? When you address it to how does it affect the disease, do they come out and smell the flowers? So we have a logic, and the logic is it is normal to bring flowers to the graveyard, to the plot where the cadaver is resting. Why is it normal? Because of our biases. It makes sense to us. We find ridiculous in the Western world to put food, but we don't find ridiculous to put flowers. Do I have a worldview? Very few people are aware of their worldview. Those that are the ones that will make it in this class and feel good and understand the concepts. Because we have been focusing on the fact that we all have equal needs of support from the Holy Spirit and from the church and from social sciences to avoid negating those that we dislike. Many are not aware of any alternative ways of making meaning of life events. So they suffer the prejudice and they need to be brought to the surface by the research team. The Milvian Bridge of Rome was built in 109 and is one of the oldest bridges that are still being used in Europe. Worldview refers to those arches that we see in the Milvian Bridge. Each of us have an arch that supports the way we think that goes on top of the bridge of our meaning-making process. And worldview is like the arches, refers to the intellectual and emotional framework within which one explains the meaning of life. This intellectual emotional framework includes one's cosmology. Our worldview gives us our particular outlook in life. How you see the world is tied to this worldview. And here we are. When you're analyzing your interviews, you must be aware of this. What is the unit of analysis? How is this unit presented? What is there in common between a tree and a narrative? So the unit of analysis are narratives, meaning the collection of words, sentences, and paragraphs on the topic dialogue about our research. Each person will do their own analysis, but it is always better, higher ground, to do analysis in community because we help keep each other truthful. Let's look at the meaning. What are you missing? What does it mean? What about a narrative? So, if the unit of analysis is a narrative and this represents a narrative, what are we seeing and what are we missing? Here it is. The ethic are the narratives, the actual words. So the branches, all the branches together with the meanings represents the ethic. Conscious communications and observable behaviors, meaning narratives or stories. The emic is what we don't see, the roots that are underneath the surface. Subconscious communications are like the roots of our logic tree. And we call that ethnography because we believe it has to do with culture. We believe that the information that will be under the tree will be similar to the largest number of people from the same culture. Then the emic is what you don't see. This is the logic of the subconscious. The subconscious communications that are like the roots of our logic tree, the ones that you don't see. Those are the ones you want to describe. What are the real reasons people sit down at a mall in front of window guessing for a window full of articles? What is the reason? The emic will reveal that. Ethic is what you see or hear, narratives, words, phrases, units of language, behavior, demeanor, interaction. Emic is the root system. Is there a logic to all we say? Where is that logic located? Culture, personality, social roles, institutional roles. How are these relating to each other in the process of defining ethic? So what is a narrative? The oral sequencing of temporally successive events, real or imaginary, it doesn't matter if it's imaginary. By means of narratives, we communicate cultural values. In this way, we warn others of lessons we have learned from our own experience. Apologies. This is an aggressive window. Lessons we have learned from our own experience or the experience of others. This is the narrative. Perhaps it is not far-fetched to say that gossip can save lives as well as ruin them. Are you aware of gossip that ruins lives? I think so. So, all subjects are assured confidentiality. In order to preserve the identity of the participants, pseudonyms are used. Do not use the real names in the write-up. Invent names, but use the same invented name for the same true person throughout the whole paper. Narratives analysis is done by a research team based on the transcribed narratives. That is the standard, the gold standard. But very few people have a research team with them. So we act alone. Validity. First, categories emerging from the narratives are identified. Second, these categories are tested by triangulation. Triangulation is a process of comparing narratives and the use of categories. Before you finish your report, you will have done analysis and you will have answered the question of how these ideas relate to the ideas shared by me before, ideas shared by others, and ideas shared in the literature. This is triangulation, putting the same category of communications in the same box as the ideas of redemption that we are teaching. Third, theoretical models are derived. So you create the categories, you analyze them, and the third step is you create models. Theoretical framework. All research is theory driven. Your selected theory will limit the scope of the inquiry. Your theory will guide the researcher consumer in interpreting the findings. It is exciting to see you coming to the end of the quarter and already analyzing the data and collecting the final scraps of data for your project that will advance the gospel in your local community by helping you contextualize the gospel. Not long ago, these were foreign ideas. Foreign idea, the concept that you could learn asking questions and building up a Google survey and putting it up on the internet. This is something that is foreign to the past. It is now that is defining how we do research. We have to document the researcher's cultural bias. Let me get very close to the camera so that I can impress this in you. Do not pretend to be a fly on the wall. Instead, be sure to impress the people that you're writing about. Theoretical plus of the researcher's biases work together, compounding its effects. Be aware of this. We all have biases, but you want to document them. The nature of the research question is possible. Each possible research question limits the approach you will use. The theoretical framework limits the research question. Researchers' cultural biases limit the research question. There are all these limitations that are real, but they do not prevent you from gathering the needed data to understand your community. But you have to gather it. Final words. Qualitative research involves analysis of data such as words, interviews, pictures, video, or objects, artifacts. Qualitative research involves analysis of numerical data. The strengths and weaknesses of qualitative and quantitative research are a perennial hot debate, especially in the social sciences. The issue invokes classic paradigm wars. So, where are you? The personality, thinking style of the researcher and or the culture of the organization is under-recognized as a key factor in preferred choice of methods. Overly focus on the debate of qualitative versus quantitative frames the methods in opposition. It is important to focus also on how the techniques can be integrated, such as in mixed methods research. More good can come of social science research developing skills in both realms than debating which method is superior. Yes, conclusion, the ideal researcher will use qualitative and quantitative research methods in a humbling manner that will create the best data set to answer the questions at hand. You're a wonderful class. We made it through this lecture. What does it have to do with my paper? 3 points. First, it has to do with your paper because you are going to do analysis of the data. And you must be aware of the process. And the process is what I outline here. Secondly, it is important because we are all consumers of data. So you're reading articles that talk about qualitative research and about quantitative research. So how do I interpret an article that is saying the mean is lower now? It has been decrease in numbers, and this relates to the outcomes for church in regards to the question at hand, meaning why people go to malls and what can we learn about that to bring them to church in the mall. So be aware of where you're going when you're writing your paper. It is not a report to say everything you learn. It is one single paper explaining the whole by tying each part together. Blessings to you. Remember, be sure to call me. You have questions? 909-382-1912. 909-382-1912. Be sure to call me in order for me to help you. Blessings to you. Thank you for your careful attendance.